so much for joining me on my podcast today.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is
Well,
great.
oh my goodness. Well, we've already had a very nice pre-air conversation, and I think it's well overdue. A shout out to our dear friend Matt Fraction for introducing us, which is
Yeah,
always very nice. And I loved
yeah,
it that I got
exactly.
to be in a little email loop with you too. That was actually quite fun.
Yeah, Matt is the greatest. Anyone Matt recommends is automatic.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
especially because he's so choosy.
It's so funny because I've been so fortunate to kind of get in with that Portland community. Greg Rucka actually just spoke to him yesterday. He says
Oh, wow.
hello. And
Oh, great.
I ended up talking to him pretty much weekly through the pandemic. We became like each other's like therapy kind of thing. And it's been amazing. But Matt has joined us a few times and I
That's
met them in
hilarious.
Portland and it was, yeah, it's been really great. So I obviously though have such a deep respect for your work and really excited to talk to you about actual comic things but other things as well and just to kind of get to know you a little bit. And this has been a weird year, as you and I were just speaking about. The last year and a half has been just jarring and just threw a wrench in everyone's world. And a lot of creators I'm fortunate to speak to on this show has told me that the pandemic has either motivated them to work more, or some have struggled greatly with just writer's block, having no creativity. And you kicked off a new series. You did Reckless with 3 books released, or about two, the third, I think,
Yeah.
and continuing to do much more like Pulp and Criminal and Friday. So, is it fair to say you are very creative during the pandemic?
It's up and down, really. Like I have weeks here or there where I just end up getting nothing done because I just have a headache that week or something, or I've gotten far enough ahead on something that it's given me enough time to procrastinate. I feel like I'm very deadline motivated in some ways, but I would say at least at least like during the first summer of the pandemic. I mean, I don't know how many summers it'll go on, but the 2020 summer was genuinely like, I think by the time we hit summer and we were 3 months into like lockdown and no one knew when vaccines were going to happen or when it would start to feel even safe to have visitors or anything. I think I started to kind of, my wife was really, really depressed about it because she's the kind of person who like, she loves having visitors come and to entertain, and to not be able to do that. And she's like very family oriented. So her like cousin is more like a sister, and her husband would come and see us like every couple of weeks here usually. And so when she was cut off from all that, she like fell into a pretty bad depression that I'd never seen. We've been married for now 21 years.
Mhm.
And I was like just sort of trying to ignore it because I work at home normally and I'm kind of I refer to myself as an indoorsman. And so I was just going back to books and I was like, oh, I'm going to reread a bunch of Ross McDonald books, or oh, I'm going to read like the Travis McGee series for the first time ever. And I'm going to go reread a bunch of Parker things. And
Mhm.
um, when the industry shut down the day we sent Pulp to the printer. And
Oh,
so I was like about to start a monthly comic that I'll probably never write at this point because like some of the ideas for it are good. Some of them are just too dark and depressing. But like I felt like what changed for me was like I was reading all these pulp novels and really just using it as a way to escape thinking about reality at that moment. And
mhm.
so I could spend, 10 or 12 hours a day on some days just like reading books if I had gotten all my work done.
Wow.
And Sean and I were helping Scott Dunbier with the collection of Darwin Cook's Parker graphic novels. And we did a short story that's going to be in the second Martini edition.
Mm.
And as Sean was drawing that, like was during the early days of lockdown. And so I was seeing those pages come in and I just suddenly had this inspiration because we didn't know like how Pulp was going to do or not. And we'd done another original graphic novel before that about the same length that did pretty well. That was called My Heroes Have Always Been Junkies. It was a couple years earlier,
Mhm.
but like I was like, it seems really stupid to start another monthly comic. The subject matter was so dark, I just didn't feel like writing it. And I had been rereading Darwin's Parker books. And suddenly I just had this burst of inspiration to be like, all right, we're gonna do our own version of like a pulp paperback hero. And let's just do it as a graphic novel, and we'll do something twice as long as what we've done before, because really we don't know what's going on. Like, when will the comics industry survive, or will we have to like take our stuff to a book publisher? Will we have to self-publish through Kickstarter or something? Like, and I just figured, worst comes to worst, we both keep working, and that way we don't have to think about this too much or worry too much about the future. Like, everybody I was talking to in publishing was like, we're going to get through this, but we just have no idea how many stores will be left. And it turned out that 2020 and 2021 have been amazing years for comic stores. I think until the last 2 weeks, because of Marvel's new distribution system. But like, at the time, I just thought, all right, well, this will keep us busy. And I was super inspired, like, at that moment, in a way that I don't feel like I'd been for, I don't even know how long. Like, I was burning through script pages. Like, I usually write like a chunk of script and send it to Sean, and then when he's got a couple pages left, I'll start working on the next chunk of script. But I was just like burning through this, and Sean was, I think we did like the first 48 pages of Reckless in like a month or month and a half or something, and then I started sending it out to show some friends. I'm like, hey, is this good? Should we, like, is this something that people will like? Because I just was like, this is what I want to do. And then I sent it to like Damon Lindelof and Joe Hill and Patton Oswalt, who I know are all like noir, like pulp novel like fans, and they just all kind of exploded over it. And I was like, holy shit, okay, wow, well, we maybe have stumbled onto something here. And so early on I was like, all right, we're going to do a bunch of these. And then it was just really like this huge burst of inspiration to do it. And then I think somewhere about halfway through the third book, I started feeling exhausted by the fact that we were doing 3 full-length graphic novels in like 10 months.
It seemed very ambitious. I was like, wow, he is just going. And I love Reckless, by the way. And
thank you.
And I generally, kind of read all different genres. It is like my husband's favorite. Crime fiction is like his favorite genre. So it's right up his alley. But and also having kind of grown up in the 80s, just kind of that whole feel, that like getting enough of that nostalgia, and just and anytime you get a chance to follow around like kind of that cool character and just like live in those walk those shoes, it's so awesome. But yeah, it seemed like, wow, I guess you are really creative because a lot of people just told me it's been just so hard to find those ideas. And I love the fact that I think you wrote at the end of one of the issues that one of the books that you have a notebook of ideas or something when you're doing Reckless. I was like, oh man, on a sidebar at some point in time, like that those type of things to me are so interesting. Like, I'd love to see that. It probably makes no sense to me, but I love that.
Oh yeah, no, I have.
Put it all together.
I'm on my second one now, which looks like this. If you can.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of. I hope no one actually freeze frames that. But yeah,
I can blur it out like witness protection.
I put Sean's little book plates on the covers of them. I like the day that I decided, okay, this is what we're gonna do, and I bounced it off of Sean to make sure he wanted to do that too, and he was, because we were ramping up to start this other thing, and he was even working on like logos and designs for it. And then I was just like, I don't want to do it. I want to do this other thing instead, this is like the second or third time I've done that to him. And he was like, oh, that sounds like fun. And, because he's always really just wanted to do graphic novels, like single issue comics. I think because he and I both, he's a couple years older than me, but we both grew up really loving like the European album format and stuff. And we were both very jealous of Darwin's Parker books, like format wise. And I think he's always longed to do stuff that was like 150, 200 page long, when you drop it all at one time and you don't like serialize it and split it up, and and then have to have all these artificial endings, and only having to come up with one cover twice a year, instead of a cover every month, which would, like, we would lose like 3 or 4 days of work to him having to figure out what the cover was for the next thing every time. And so I think he really like just leapt at it too, and thought it would just be a lot of fun, and he could experiment with his art style a little bit. And I sent him the first couple chapters like within a couple days, and he was like, oh, this is great. And I mean, the great thing about it for me too, and I think one of the reasons it's so inspiring is because I'm escaping into the past.
Mhm.
Like it's written from the present tense and it's very much written from like the world we're living in right now. It's like I imagine basically like Ethan sat down like when lockdown hit and decided to write his memoirs eventually,
Yeah.
you know, because it was like, all right, I can't do this, I can't do that. I'm going to just start writing the interesting stories of these days. And
Mhm.
so it's very much written from like a POV of someone who way back in the 70s saw that like global warming and capitalism and everything was going to destroy the world eventually. And now it's like written from a point of view where it feels like it's happening much sooner than we all expected.
Yeah, like
And
today.
yeah, exactly. Like it's on fire. Um, but yeah, I was trying to figure out like what would be different about, you know, our character as opposed to just old characters from, you know, the 60s and 70s. And I definitely wanted to use the aesthetics of that kind of pulp paperback hero,
Yeah.
but I wanted to bring more of like a more of our like modern reality to it to some degree, and also eschew a lot of the eschew. I've never used that word in a sentence out loud before. Eschew all the like bad cliches from the. I'm fine with good cliches, but I hated all the bad cliches when I was rereading like the Travis McGee books. I'm like,
Mhm.
there he's so ahead of the curve. I mean, that's a Florida noir, and it's like he's so ahead of the curve on the environment because he was like living in Florida and watching like capitalism destroy like the wetlands and
Mhm.
stuff, and but so behind the curve on the treatment of women in his books, like.
Right, right,
And
right.
so I realized like looking back at a lot of these, like Ross McDonald was pretty good throughout his whole career. He never like veered into like the super cliches, but like Travis McGee will like actually consider quitting a job if the woman that's hiring him is not super hot and doesn't put out the vibe that she might want to have sex with him, which I was like, wow, this is kind of shocking. And yet at the same time, the books were like super popular and are really
Mhm.
well put together. And if you can overlook that stuff, you're like, oh wow, this book totally influenced Chinatown, or you
Okay,
know,
yeah.
like but it was interesting to me. So I was like, all right, we're gonna not have any of that stuff that I hate. So it's like dropping a pulp character into like the world of that I would want to be reading
Yeah, like
about and
knowing what you know
that I
now.
remember. Yeah,
Ah,
exactly. And dropping them into like the world where I remember it in a way. But writing about the past, I think it's like you can write about the past, but you're also writing about today for one
mhm.
thing, which is like fun about it. But I think it's more inspiring to me than trying to figure out what to write right now. Like I remember after 9/11 talking to Greg Rucka about that.
Mm,
And I was like, suddenly I'm thinking like, oh, do I have to write crime stories where the bad guys are like Arab terrorists or something? And it's like, I don't want to do that.
right.
But then I'm like, nothing else feels relevant, you
Mhm.
know, like at that very moment in time, like the only thing that felt relevant was that like the World Trade Center had been
Mhm.
blown up by hijacked planes, and we were going to war and all this stuff was happening, and it was like all the little human stories felt completely irrelevant, and that's the stuff I love. So I was trying to find a way, like, is there a way to write something like this that's fun and escapist, but also has a little bit of relevance to like what we're going through right now,
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. Well, I feel like obviously mission accomplished there. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that, where you said, kind of growing up, you liked the European model, because I read that your father was an avid reader and you got a lot of influence from seeing what books he read, and you were introduced to comics, I guess, from the Navy base. And
Yeah.
maybe you could kind of share a little bit about that discovery, because it seems like you have such a grasp of writing for comics so well down, and I just like to know kind of like what that was like for you, kind of growing up reading, and what
Oh
influences
yeah,
that had.
sure. Yeah, my dad was an English teacher, and he was a college English teacher in the 50s, and he was going to get drafted, and his brother was I guess at that point not a big mucky muck, but his brother was like some kind of uh officer in the CIA in the early days from like when it first formed.
Oh.
And so he pulled some strings and got my dad into officers candidate school to join the Navy. And my dad went straight out of officers candidate school to naval intelligence. So he was a really odd character because like one part of him was very much like a old school Republican military like guy. And then there was this other part of him that had always wanted to be a writer. And in fact, like he eventually, when I was in high school, gave me and my brother this whole box of all the novels and short stories that he'd written when he was like in college and after. And he had never completely given up the writing bug. For about 25 years, he didn't write at all. And then
Wow.
during the last like 10 years of his life, he was trying to write like a trilogy of novels about what he actually did in Vietnam, like basically like spy thrillers about Vietnam. Well, not thrillers, but just spy stories that were set around like the Tet Offensive and stuff.
Okay.
And he was actually a really good writer. My brother once basically rewrote one of his stories and turned it in for like an English essay and got like the best grade in school. Which I think my dad was kind of proud when he found out later. My brother told him, he's like, I got an A+ for this. But so he was like always wanted to write, and he had grown up reading comics, and because he was born in like 1934, and so comics were just starting when he was at the age where he started reading. So he knew comics, and he was really into all sorts of comics like Classics Illustrated and like horror stuff. He of course read like superhero comics when he was a little kid during World War II. And so he was big about how comics led him to reading books, I think. And
okay.
But he was really into like Nabokov and Pynchon and stuff like that. But he read the spectrum. Like he would also read every James Bond novel when it came out, and every like Raymond Chandler or like Ross McDonald. I remember like our house, basically every wall in our house was a bookcase, and I just assumed that houses were just built that way. When I first went to someone else's house that didn't have books everywhere, I was like, where are your books? Like I just didn't understand. I just thought this is what people do.
Yeah, you live in a library. And
yeah, exactly. And he was always trading stuff in to get better editions of things.
Oh, nice.
And so when we were living in Gitmo, I think we lived there from like 70 to 74, because his stay got extended because there were military cutbacks like during the Nixon regime. And so they used to only they normally made people stay there for 2 years. But we stayed there for longer, which I guess led to a bunch of people getting divorced, probably. Because the interesting thing about Navy life is that the husband is usually gone for 6 months out of the year on Westpac.
Right.
But when you're stationed in Gitmo, the husband is there full time. And I have another friend who spent time there when he was in high school. So he saw all the things that I went to first grade through third grade there. Like I don't have any memories of the adults doing any crazy stuff, but he told me all sorts of crazy stories about like parties and wife swapping and all sorts of crazy stuff that was going on back in the late 70s. But at the time, like we moved there and I was just like, oh, this is just where we live. We live on a Navy base and like Navy housing. And, we lived in this really cool little like 3-bedroom house. On this place called Radio Point, which is where like the Navy people live. People from the Navy and the Marines lived there in different areas. And my dad one day, I think he was trying to get me and my brother, who's a couple years older than me, started reading early. And so he asked all the guys at the office, like, hey, do your kids have any comics that they don't want anymore? And a lot of them had like teenage kids who had, basically been reading comics since the 50s and sort of were like, yeah, I don't need these anymore. And so he came home one day with this huge box of comics, and me and my brother just sat there and divided them up and thought about like who got what. And I remember the first comic I ever read was like a coverless version of like issue 6 of the Fantastic Four.
Oh, wow.
But there were like EC comics and like Harvey's and Dell, and there was all sorts of stuff. It was like just the gamut of everything you could. I don't think there were any Little Lulus in there, which is a real shame because that's a great comic. But there was like Little Dot and like a lot of Archies, some ECs. I remember reading like some of the EC horror things when I was way too young to probably be reading those.
So you really got a variety.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't read at that point. I think I was like
Mhm.
3, so I wasn't actually
Wow.
reading. I was just looking at the comics
Right.
and studying them over and over again. So I always think of comics as like my first language in some ways. Like
Oh, wow.
I knew like how comics worked and what the stories were just from looking at the pictures and trying to figure out like, oh, what are they saying? And sometimes my dad would sit over my shoulder and like read the words to me and stuff. And and so when I started, when I learned to read, I think I got promoted from kindergarten to first grade because I could already read like rudimentary words and I knew how to tie my shoes or something. And so like I graduated at 17 because of that.
Mhm.
but yeah, we just were my brother and I were just super into comics and also super competitive about like the collecting of them,
Right.
and which
Were
was
there like
interesting because
bartering to trade and like did you
or
get
we'd get mad if we found your comic in his room or vice versa. Like if I went into his room and looked through his comics and took one and was reading it in bed and left it in my room instead of returning it exactly. Like, we were that kind of brothers.
right.
But yeah, so my whole life, like when I was a little kid, I just was like, oh, I'm going to draw comics. Like even as a
Ah.
very little kid, I was so obsessed with like Spider-Man or Captain America that I would sit and just trace pictures of them. And
Mhm.
I was sure I was going to draw comics. And I never even thought about the writing part. I just assumed like, oh, well, someone will come up with a story or tell me what to write or whatever. And until then, I'll just make up my own
Mhm.
stories so I have something to draw. So I would get 5 pages into a lot of things, like from age like 5 to like till like 16 or so when I started doing like mini comics and publishing them. I would start a lot of things and be like, I don't know where to go with this. So I kind of learned how to write just so that I would give myself things to draw, I think.
Wow. Yeah. Because you started as a cartoonist. Is this correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I was a cartoonist in the 80s and the 90s, late 80s through like most of the 90s. And then I started getting work as a writer and realized that that was really, I was like, I never kept a sketchbook. I always kept a notebook
Mm,
about
okay.
stuff. So I was much more of a writer who drew than an artist who wrote, I think.
Okay.
And it just, something just clicked one day. I think when I was working on Scene of the Crime for Vertigo, I realized this was just as pleasurable as, the when I would publish one of my own comics, I would just see everything that I hated about it.
Hmm.
Whereas like getting pages from like Michael Lark and Sean Phillips, I'm like, oh, there's nothing I hate on this. And someone else has to do all the hard part. Like I just have to write it. So at that point, I just sort of stopped drawing comics and stopped drawing for a long time, at
Yeah.
all. And just started, trying to build a career as a writer. And, within a couple years, I was apparently writing Batman with Greg and, creating Gotham Central and redefining Catwoman. And,
Yes.
like
No,
it all
it's
happened very fast.
it did well, and this is, I of course know about you and your work and everything, but I usually get all of my advice from one of my friends who owns a comic book shop and is pretty much he's like my go-to. Okay, what should I read next? And shout out to Paper Asylum in Beverly, Massachusetts. But like, he's like, Brubaker is basically the Wire of comics, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you read by him. It's the best thing you're going to be reading and wanting to talk about after you finish. And he talks about like, and if you don't think Gotham Central, as soon as you hear Brubaker or Rocca, then you don't you don't exist to him. But I just told this to Greg yesterday that he said your combined writing is ridiculous. That's one of the ultimate tag teams in comic history, and it's like give mere mortals a chance, And so obviously, like you said, it seemed quote unquote like it went fast, but you're telling me from when you were 3, you've already kind of
Yeah.
been like it was your first language. So it kind of makes a lot of sense why you were so amazing at it and got Eisner nominations pretty early on and everything. So, I mean, it's not just an opinion. I mean, it's clearly
Yeah.
been,
the
it's been
first
set
time
in
I went
stone.
to the first time I went to the Eisners, it was like held in a panel room in the afternoon. And I was like, Eric Shanauer and I had been nominated for the first thing I ever wrote that someone else drew was like a serialized thing in Dark Horse Presents,
Mm-hmm.
called An Accidental
Accidental
Death,
death.
which actually took place on Gitmo. And because he was the one who went there later in life than me, and he lived on the same block that I did, but like
Mm-hmm.
8 years later. um but yeah, it was kind of one of those things where I think part of it is that like I still write scripts for other people the way I wrote scripts for myself.
Mhm.
So I still picture like the beats on the page. I think a lot about the rhythm of the page. I think I got that Will Eisner book about storytelling. I can't remember the name of it now, but one of his like comics, like how-to books, and it talked a lot about the rhythm of the page, like the panels themselves, and then the words and the sound effects. And he demonstrates it by like an old Spirit thing where there's like water dripping from a sink and how it's driving this guy crazy. And I remember reading that when I was like 10 or 12 or something and being really influenced by that and sort of
Wow.
blown away by, like, oh, okay. And so even to this day, like whenever we're about to go to print with something or when Sean's done with something, I read it over so many times. And if there's anything that like bumps me or that I feel like messes up the rhythm of the page, I'll try to get him to change it. And most of the time he will. But like I'm always changing dialogue or changing
Yeah.
narration or something to make it somehow like a little bit smoother, because I never want those bumps that take you out of the experience, because comics at its best is like a completely immersive experience between the reader and the creators.
Yeah.
And I mean there's nothing as great to me as reading like a good comic or a good novel. Like I think those two things, because when you're watching a movie or whatever, you can, especially nowadays, you can get distracted, or you
Mhm.
see, like if you go to a movie theater, like if that ever becomes a thing we all do again, like I was always the guy who was like mad at the arc light in LA when I'd see somebody in the lower rows like checking their cell phone messages or
Right.
whatever. And I'm like, I get it, you're worried about your kids at home or whatever, but like go out to the lobby. Like
Yeah.
everyone in the like I was like that guy, like don't take me out of this experience.
Right. Right.
So that's one of the things I just love about comics is like
Yeah.
it's just you're sitting there with your book and you just completely shut out the rest of the world if you're really into a great comic.
Mhm.
Like, I recently reread Black Hole,
Oh, cool.
and I was so just taken away by it. I didn't even notice that they were like doing construction next door that day. I was like, oh, I was told, my wife was like, oh, did that drive you crazy? And I'm like, nah, what? And she's like, oh, they were vibrating the house. I was like, oh, I didn't even notice.
There it is. So,
You
and that's a
know,
great tip. If there's like, because to me, my lawn people, not mine, but like my
oh
whole
yeah,
neighborhood feels like everyone's doing lawn every day. And so I'm like, all right,
oh
that's it.
yeah,
I'm gonna try that and try to be submerged. But I get very like I need silence and yeah,
yeah.
but that's great that I'll try that. I'll
It's
try to just submerge
That's really
myself.
funny. Yeah, I'm the same way. I'm always like, why aren't they coordinating this? Why
Yeah.
don't people know? Why don't we have just like one day a week where it's all happening?
Exactly. And then it's like loud at one point, and especially because I podcast from home and
Yeah.
it's without a doubt silence. And as soon as I hit record and we go to interview and I have someone really important, I'm like, come on, no lawn people today at this time. And they're never the same time. Like I've written down my neighbors'
Oh
schedules and
wow.
they're like still kind of random. I'm like, what is happening?
Yeah. Yeah, in LA, it's like totally interesting because people are in and out of a yard in like 5 or 10 minutes, and they'll have specific days. So, like where we live in LA, we have a rental down there, and people, it's like there's like a good hour that day where you're just hearing like like leaf blowers nonstop, and then it's
Mhm.
done for the week. And I'm like, oh, thank God. But I think it's because there's only like
Nice.
two companies that handle like the whole block or
Okay.
something. Because it's like the in LA it's like it's about like quantity over like length of time, but like where we stay now, like people will be doing yard work for like 2 hours on my neighbor's yard. I'm like, what are you doing?
I
Like
know.
mow the grass, blow the, that's like it should, in LA it takes 15 minutes. And then I'm
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, but like half the people in LA don't have grass now.
Right. There's like a little patch where the dogs go to the
Yeah.
bathroom and that's it.
Exactly. That's so
Yeah,
funny.
no, it's lawn care 24/7 around here. So now I've got like the quiet curtains up and all this stuff. I'm
Oh
trying to like
God,
insulate my windows and it's just
that's
like it's
hilarious.
yeah, it's a whole thing. Podcast problems, right? First world problems.
Yeah,
But
first world podcast problems. Those panels that you can hang on your wall, those
yes,
acoustic panels apparently are really great.
yes, I have
I was at a place
some.
where that had some of those up on the walls, and I was shocked I couldn't hear the people in the next room or anything. I was
Yeah.
like, wow.
Yeah, I have some of
But
those things, but the really good ones are pretty high budget, high end,
yeah, I bet.
So, I've heard, oh, you could do like egg cartons on the wall or
Oh
something like that. I
yeah.
was like, all right, I'm not a crafty person. So,
Yeah, my high school band, we did that to
okay.
try to get like
What,
less complaints from neighbors. We got less complaints. We still got complaints.
right. What did you play in band in high school?
Oh, I was briefly the lead singer for like a sort of punk ska band where we just did
Oh,
covers.
okay.
Yeah, I graduated high school in 84. So when I was in like 10th grade, the guy who sat next to me in chemistry class was a drummer.
Oh, okay.
And so I convinced him that we should form after I saw like the decline of Western civilization and dance craze. I was like, let's form a punk ska band. And then I got kicked out of the band after our first gig and replaced with the most popular kid in school. And then
Oh,
they got so many gigs after that. I
oh.
went to so many parties that they were playing at, and I was always like, and then they'd call me up on stage to do nightclub or something.
Okay. At least you got a little cameo. You got to
Yeah,
get in there and
it was pretty
jam.
funny.
Oh my
It was
gosh.
pretty funny. I was always very jealous that I got kicked because I thought I was better than him too. But he was
Oh.
the ASB president and he was like a friend of my brother's. And I apparently badmouthed him so much that one day he told my brother that I had to stop or he was going to kick my ass. And I was like, really? You're going to let him kick my ass? Because I was tiny until like 11th grade. I was like one of the smallest kids in school.
Oh.
But then I had a growth spurt between 10th and 11th grade and was suddenly like 6 feet tall.
Wow.
So
Okay.
yeah, it was really interesting change in how I was treated.
Isn't that interesting? I mean,
Yeah.
it's funny how that plays into like kids' psyche because like size kind of matters in a sense. But now it's like, as a martial art teacher, this is something where we teach about posturing and I focus and all these things because I mean, I am a Asian woman, obviously. And so I'm never going to be 6 feet tall. Like I'm not going to
Yeah.
be intimidating, but yeah. So it's interesting because it's like always the big kids, generally don't really get picked on as much because especially if there's all these little kids in the class. So
Yeah, it's weird too because you form your self-image. I was telling a friend of mine, I think you form your self-image at the point where you hate yourself the most.
yeah.
Like where you have the most problems with yourself when you see yourself in the mirror, and that's how you see it. But like I always think of myself as a really short, skinny kid, and so sometimes I will not look in a mirror for like a week or two because I'm like a man and I work at home. I'm not, now I'm on
You're not
Zoom
looking in
all
the
the
mirror all the
time.
time.
Yeah, like if I look at myself on Zoom, I'm like, oh God, that's what I look. But like every now and then I'll walk by like a mirror and I'm like, who is that giant? And I'm like, God, it looked like Tony Soprano just walked by or something. Like, and I'm always horrified because in my mind I'm like this skinny little kid.
Fascinating.
And
Yeah.
and then I grew up to be
that
kind
got
of a
kicked out of the band.
stocky. Yeah, they got kicked out of the band. I was better than him. Fuck you,
I'm
Jimmy
sure you
Ty.
were.
I could take him now.
I'm sure. Definitely.
He's like 60. He's like 58 years old.
Then you could definitely take him.
He probably has a heart condition.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Okay, so another thing I wanted to ask you about with comics is that I love talking about the collaboration process, especially because you've co-authored so many things that have been so successful, and obviously you work with Sean Phillips a lot. But I know you touched on it a little earlier, but is that like process? What is that process like for you? Like, is it different with every project? Or, I mean, you tend to obviously work with Sean a lot, but is it once you kind of find that rhythm, you kind of like to stay with what feels seamless? Or
that's how it's been for me. Like early on, I found like I've worked with a bunch of different artists on different projects. Like at Marvel and DC, I probably worked with 25 or 30 different artists here and there, but it was always like Steve Epting, Michael Lark, Sean Phillips, now Marcos Martin. Like I really loved working with Darwin Cook on Catwoman, and when he actually passed away, we were talking about doing another project together. I feel like I would when you're doing monthly comics, especially, like a lot of times schedule wise, they're just sort of slotting in like, oh, we need someone to draw the next arc, or, so I got lucky on like Captain America that Steve Epting drew probably like 80% of the issues. And for the first couple of years, we had Michael doing like flashbacks in this. And so Steve could do like 16 pages and Michael would draw like 8 pages or something. Um, but yeah, I really like when I develop like a good working relationship with someone and I feel like they get the pacing right and they get the tone of what the thing is supposed to be. It's so important to like how I write, and it allows me to write less. My scripts for new artists are so much more detailed than a script for, like, the first script that I wrote for Friday for Marcos was so much more detailed than the stuff that I give him now. Now the details are only on like, okay, here's what this location needs and blah, blah, blah. Like, but after that, it's like a sentence or two for each panel. And, I just trust that he's going to get the pacing right and understand the rhythm of the page. And like, I'm really fortunate that I've worked with so many great artists, but the ones I've clicked with are people who are like me, where they like really grew up immersed in comics and studying the art form. Like all of those artists that like Steve Epting and I, who I hope to do another project with soon. Like Steve Epting, Marcos, Sean, Michael Lark, like I could have a 4-hour conversation with them about like any inker from the 50s, like they all know, like when I make a reference to something, I don't have to explain who that person is or
There's
whatever.
like a
Like they
shorthand.
we all grew up kind of obsessing. We were all roughly in the same age range, and we all grew up obsessed with comics at a time period where you really had to hunt to find things. Like you had to dig through back issue bins or go to the libraries and find like old reprints of like those books where they would reprint Flash Gordon strips and Tarzan and so you'd study inking and underground comics. And so it's like I like to work with people who have that same kind of frame of reference as me. And sometimes when I meet like I'll meet like amazing artists that are much younger, and I feel like there's like whole sections of their comics education that they're missing. Like they're referencing the work of people who are influenced by all the same people, but they may not know who Alex Toth is, who's like one of the greatest comic artists of all time. And it's like, but they'll know who David Mazzucchelli is because he drew Batman Year One. And I'm like, yeah, but there would be no David Mazzucchelli if there wasn't an Alex Toth.
And and I agree with you as somebody who like teaches traditional kung fu. Like it's kind of important to know your roots and to know the origins of things, because there's just a respect for the craft at that point, and like it's just kind of knowing your history. And I guess it's kind of feels like it's a bit of the same.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was actually talking to like Bruce Timm a couple weeks ago, and we ended up spending like an hour just talking about Frank Robbins and what era of Frank Robbins we liked the best. It's just like that's kind of my jam in a way. Is like I'm like an old school comics nerd. I remember like when stuff was hard to get and you couldn't just punch a name into Google and see like a million things. I remember the hunt for when I'd heard about Reed Fleming for like a year before I could actually get my hands on a Reed Fleming comic. Reed Fleming is World's Toughest Milkman.
And
it was a big comic in the 80s.
Okay. And does that make you almost like frustrated for this generation? And it's like that Netflix binge generation, or like that everything's so at their disposal? Or do you feel like there's less appreciation, or do you feel like, oh wow, what a great opportunity it is for everyone?
I don't know. I mean, I want everybody who works in comics to have like a huge understanding. I want anyone who's working in any medium to have like a big understanding of the history of that medium. But I also work in Hollywood, and I know every now and then I reference like a movie from the 40s and I just get blank stares. So like it's like I want everybody to be like Christopher Nolan about it, where it's like or David Fincher, where they've like grown up immersed in that thing. Like I feel like if you're going to be great at comics, and I will say, I think just about everybody who's really successful and great at comics has that. They have that sort of, they have studied, or they're continuing to, and they're
Mhm.
continuing to discover things. I mean, I think in the last couple years, you can see like guys like Tom King or James Tynan, like you see them like experimenting with format and or like page, page design and stuff that clearly shows that they've hit the point where they're like rereading a bunch of old comics from the 80s and seeing how like Howard Chaykin and Alan Moore and all these other people were using the grid
Mhm.
structure in different ways. And like I think it's really important for anyone who wants to be great at an art form to really study the work of everybody who was great at it before. Like
Yeah.
it's, and I mean, it's not always easy to do, but like I have several friends who are like comic book teachers too. Like
Yeah.
my friends James Sturm and Jason Lutz have a comic book school in Vermont, the
Wow.
Center for Cartoon Studies, and like Tilly Walden went there and then came out and is like one of the biggest cartoonists in the world now.
Yeah.
And she does these huge graphic novels that sell hundreds of thousands of copies, and she was like Jason's star pupil basically. And like
Nice.
I know that their library has like a huge breadth of comics from the beginning of comics all the way
Yeah.
up to today. Probably not very much on the superhero side of it, but they have a spectrum of everything that's good in their like comics library for their students. And
Mhm.
they teach like comics history and stuff. Like it's important to understand the history of your mediums, and at the same time, I don't want people to be beholden to the past. Like I don't think, if like, because sometimes knowing too much about an art form can also limit you in what you do with it.
Okay.
Like you might like invent a new kung fu move if you didn't actually know everything. Like maybe that's not a good analogy, but like with comics, I
Yeah.
remember like early on when I first was writing and drawing my own comics, before I had done too much of it, I would
Yeah.
try different things out that I would later just automatically go, oh, that won't work. And
Mhm.
so I think it's important to sort of, it's important to study the art form and the history of the art form. But I also acknowledge that a lot of, at least the writing and storytelling of comics from like the 40s and 50s and 60s can be really stiff and formal compared to comics of today. So I could
Mhm.
understand why, someone would look at something published in 1972 and go, why is the caption and the word balloon and the action all saying the exact same thing? Because that's what I look at when I say that. But then I'm like, yeah, but the art's really cool. you know and that's also because it was written for like 6-year-olds back
Yeah.
then.
Yeah, I mean, audience has changed as well, and like you said, as historically time goes on, we're looking at, you're looking at what's happening today and writing Reckless, for example, in a period, but with the knowledge of what you have today. So I think there's a
Yeah,
happy blend of
exactly.
everything. But I did want to also ask you, of course, because you do work in Hollywood and have had so much involvement in, Winter Soldier, and of course how we see the MCU, universe and how it is in comics, and like kind of what that what your opinion is on everything, because you've had such a hand in so many of the characters that are now of course popularized mostly because of movies.
Yeah,
And what your thoughts are on all of that.
I mean, I think it's interesting. On the one hand, like, it's funny because I grew up in that era where when you were into comics, you kind of had to hide it. If you got to high school and you were still into comics, you didn't tell anyone else unless it was like
Right.
someone in your D&D group, which was another thing that you also hid. And so it's been really fascinating for me to see the like nerd explosion of the last like 20 years or 15
Yeah.
years or whatever. Like I would have killed to have girls be into comics and D&D and video games when I was growing up. Like
Yeah.
my wife is actually the first person I ever met who was a woman who had a Blade Runner and Time Bandits poster on her wall. And I
Nice.
was like, holy shit, who is this woman? I've got to marry her.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, we met in like the late 90s. But now it's like the whole world has shifted, and like the comic nerd culture has kind of won in a way, like to the point
Hmm.
where like Martin Scorsese's complaining about it now.
Yeah.
you know. And it's like, and all these people have to deal with the fact that like every tentpole movie is somehow based on a comic book, or like the
Yes.
biggest show on television for like the last 10 years is The Walking Dead, and it's based on a comic book and adapts it pretty faithfully in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's really interesting to me because I never would have expected it. Like growing up, if you would have told like 14-year-old me that this was the pop culture future we'd be in, or that you'd go to Comic-Con and it would be like 60% women and like 60% of them in costume.
Yeah.
Because when I was growing up, like the only women that went to Comic-Con in like the 70s and early 80s were either hardcore X-Men nerds, and there was probably like, they were probably 2% of the like populace that attended Comic-Con, or they were like what were referred to as booth babes, who were paid to dress up like characters and had no interest in comics or comic book fans. And
Right.
it was just like a way for dealers to like attract like people to their booths. Basically, they'd have like some girl dressed up as Phoenix. And I mean, it's such a shift at some point in the mid 90s to late 90s. Like it just started shifting. I think I speculate that like anime and manga had like a huge effect on that, because I remember driving by like convention centers in Seattle back then and seeing like teenage girls dressed up like Sailor Moon everywhere. And I'm like, oh wow, this is becoming a thing where you don't have to pay them. They will spend months of their lives making their own costume to just wear it for one day at a convention. And which I thought was so cool, because I remember like when I was a kid, the costume contest at Comic-Con was a huge thing. And that was the day when you would see people cosplaying. Like I remember a friend of mine, my first roommate after high school, actually, when he was still like, he was like 14 or 15, I remember he and a bunch of friends dressed as the entire cast of ElfQuest for the costume contest.
Oh,
and he
wow.
he was Skywise. But yeah, it was like not so common. Now it's just like every day is cosplay day.
Yeah.
And, it's totally insane. And I love that aspect of it. On the other hand, like I think it's weirdly unhealthy for so much of pop culture to be superhero mythology, which sort of tells the same story over and over again, which is that like there are good guys and there are bad guys, and the good guys will always win because they will put on their costumes and beat up the bad guys. And it's like that's what I got like drove me crazy eventually when I was writing superhero comics, as I was like, they all have the same ending. Like everybody puts on costumes and gets in a big punch out and blasts each other with eye beams and stuff, and whoever's the good guy wins. And it's like that's not real. That's not life. That doesn't reflect what's really happening in the world. Like we give ourselves these myths and these little cliche sayings and stuff that sort of make us all feel good and look away from like a huge amount of injustice and other things that are happening in the world that just sort of help make us consumers basically. And so you can, but at the same time also pop culture makes people very happy, and so they can sort of go on with life when you have like a pandemic or something. It's like thank God for Netflix for the last couple of years. I'm very excited that the third season of You came out, so I can watch the creepy stalker couple again.
Creepy.
But also really weirdly compelling.
Oh no, I couldn't keep going. I was like, okay, too creepy for me. Well, no, actually what you just said really resonated, because as somebody who was introduced to comics later in life, actually my husband was the comic book geek, he was really into it. And I mean, growing up, of course, I loved Wonder Woman, but that was mostly from the TV show Wonder Woman, not because I was reading the comic, and you had the outfit, the boots and everything. But like,
oh wow,
reading it later, I actually tend to be less of I don't really read the superhero comics as much. Like, and I think what you articulated makes sense, because you kind of are getting the same story. Like you kind of know what's going to happen. And I really like material where I have no idea about this character or who they are.
Yeah.
I know who Superman is. I know who Spider-Man is. And there's some great arcs and stories
Yeah,
and,
yeah,
and graphics.
exactly.
That doesn't take away, but I do prefer, you know, and this is probably why I've gravitated to a lot of things that you write, and Greg Rucka and Brian K. Vaughan and things like that, where it's like, I don't know anything about this character. What's going on? And I've really taken to a lot of those comics. And so when people ask me, oh, who's your favorite superhero? I'm like, oh, I don't really think of it that way because they know I
Yeah,
like comics. I'm like, well, you know, and
yeah,
I'll throw out, you know, something that I've read. And so, but that makes a lot of sense because I like to have something where I really have no idea what's going to happen. You know, I
yeah.
don't want to know the ending.
Yeah, and that, I don't want to make it sound like I hate like all superhero
Of
comics or
course
something.
not.
I just
Yes.
love
Yeah.
it when people are trying like completely different things within them. Like I
Yes.
loved like Hickman's first like year on the X-Men. I was like, oh wow, this is a completely new take
Yes.
on, and I feel like I got
Yeah.
away
The
with
Hawk Spock
murder
stuff.
on, yeah, and I feel like I got away with murder on Captain America, like being able to like kill him and keep him dead for a couple years and have like nobody knew what was going on in that comic.
You
I
did
remember a
get away
year
with
into
murder.
it, yeah, like, literally. I
Literally.
remember like a year into it, there was like this mass email from Jeff Loeb going, shouldn't someone wear a Captain America costume eventually? But I loved being able to play with all those archetypes and try to do different kinds of stories within them that also sort of touched on my own childhood nostalgia for that genre.
Yeah.
It was only when I started like accepting jobs on team books and stuff that it started to drive me crazy, because I was like, I don't know how to manage all these characters. And like you could look at almost any book I write and say it's a team book, but like Captain America, I didn't have to service like 7 characters in every issue. I just did sometimes anyway. And it started to drive me a little nuts when I was working on like Secret Avengers or X-Men, that I was just like, I don't know how to make this work. Like my brain doesn't compute around that. I was able to use superhero comics and write like espionage stories or crime stories. I mean, Greg and I did Gotham Central
Yeah.
because they wanted us to do Batman and the Outsiders. And we started talking about it over the phone, and both of us had no ideas for Batman in a team book. And we both really just wanted to write about what it was like to be a cop in Gotham City. So we pitched that and we just kept saying, let us do it until they let us do it. And even then they were going to make us call it like Gotham Murder City at one point, which we both hated. And we were at like a Batman summit and Jeanette Kahn showed up, and I sketched the Gotham Central logo with the badge and the everything. And I said, this is what we want to call it. And I remember like the person who had told us we couldn't call it that was sitting across the table. And Jeanette was like, oh, this is perfect. And so I totally like went over the editor-in-chief's head to like get the book called that. But we just really wanted to write, like, we were both obsessed with the book Homicide because it was pre The Wire. Because a lot of people are like, oh, they were influenced by The Wire. I was like, no, we were influenced by David Simon's book that predates The Wire or the Homicide TV show. But yeah, I always sort of tried to use the genre and push it in different directions just for my own personal like sanity and fun. But I think it really, I came out of alternative comics into superhero comics and was trying to mine like my own childhood nostalgia and mix it with my own current interests at the time. So I like that, like the second Captain America movie, well, the second and third Captain America movies, though the director and writers would say the first one was highly influenced by my run too. But there's like in the second and third one, I really feel like, oh yeah, they're doing the exact same tone. I mean, the third one, like half the plot is like literally like lifted from a year on the Winter Soldier comic that I wrote.
Right.
But like I love seeing that kind of tone in those movies, and I think that Marvel has done a really good job overall with all that stuff. Like I'm really excited to see what they're doing with the Hawkeye show, and I know Matt like worked on that a little bit actually. But it does look like they're they've done all their big kind of predictable things, and now they're trying to be unpredictable, which I think is much more interesting to me. Like I'm very excited to see the Shang-Chi movie, mostly just for Aquafina, but I'm just like a huge Aquafina fan.
Oh, nice, nice. Yes. Well, I did safely go and see it. I rented out a theater for just my family and my kung fu instructors so that they
Oh
could
wow.
experience something in a safe environment, but also something we wanted to be supportive of. And so yeah, we really enjoyed that. But yeah,
Oh
so
good.
it was safe, because and I still made everyone wear
Yeah.
masks.
Oh yeah.
And we still
Perfect.
sat separately. Like it was
Yeah,
still,
exactly.
it was, but it worked out, and it's surprisingly affordable to do that actually. So
Yeah, at that point, especially,
yeah, they were
you
like,
know,
anyone please come and rent the
yeah.
theaters. Please.
I was talking to a friend of mine. We were considering renting a theater just for the two of us to see Tenet,
Oh
because I
yeah,
was
because
like,
you want to see
and
it
then
on the screen.
I'm glad I didn't
Yeah.
and waited, just
Yeah.
because it's my least favorite of the Nolan movies.
Mm. What's your
Just
favorite?
personally, my favorites are Memento, The Prestige, and Inception.
Okay.
I think those three sort of go together
Mhm.
thematically very well. They're all about his obsession with the idea of losing your wife,
Mhm.
and his obsession with storytelling and all of them. And
Yeah.
I think those are like the ones where he lets his emotion into it a lot, though
Yeah.
most people would disagree with me on that. A lot of people seem to think there's no emotion in his movies. I'm like, you're just missing it.
I really loved Inception. I think Memento is a good film. I was just a little creepy for me. Like it just give me a
Yeah,
feeling, give you a
that was one of the movies
feeling.
that made me wanna like go to LA and write movies or write TV, because like Breaking Bad, The Sopranos, those were
Hmm.
all like highly influential on me.
Yeah.
Like when I saw Memento the first time, I think I saw it like 10 times in the theater because I was so obsessed with studying the structure of it and how it worked. But I was just so jealous that I didn't do it myself. Like
Ah.
I was like, oh, this seems like the kind of thing I would have written if had I been smarter and made a movie.
Well, you're still writing, and so
That's true.
we've got time. We've got time, and everything
Yeah.
you seem to be writing is very, very enjoyable. And I don't want to take up all day of your time. Speaking of, but I do want to talk a little bit about the upcoming issues, the upcoming books that we've got coming out. Which, of course, we've got the third Reckless and Friday. If you want to
Oh yeah.
tell our audience a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, the Reckless series, because we had a little bit of lead time, we decided to put out the first three books in under a year. This third one comes out next week, Destroy All Monsters, and each book in the series is about 150 pages long and tells like a complete story.
Mhm.
Destroy All Monsters takes place in 1988. The first one was 1981, the second one was 1985, and this one is 1988. And this one focuses a lot more on Ethan Reckless and Anna, his sort of assistant slash
Oh, good.
projectionist.
Yes.
Yeah,
Projectionist. I love that.
yeah.
They work out of a theater.
Yeah, he works out of a like out of business movie
Yeah,
theater
like an
that he
abandoned.
owns and has an apartment in. And yeah, like I loved Anna's character so much in the first two books, even though she's barely in them, that I was like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. So the third book is all about their history and their relationship while they're
Nice.
also working a case that sort
Okay.
of blows up in their faces. But it's about that. Like most of my life, when I was younger, especially, like most of my best friends were girls or women. And like now it's probably like 50-50. Like my closest friends are like men and women. And but like, in Hollywood, like I've worked with my friend Hallie. Like we're about to start like our fourth project together, I think, for another TV show.
Mhm.
And I always think it's funny that it's like one of my best friends is like this woman who's 20 years younger than me. But it's just like we just click and get along and understand each other. And I wanted to write about like that kind of thing when you're like friends with a woman and there's nothing sexual about it or all. You're not in like the friend zone, you're actually friends.
Right.
You're not waiting for them to
Yes.
suddenly
No
discover that
ulterior
you're the right
motives.
man for them. Yeah, the no ulterior motive friendship. And also like the age difference friendship, which I think is
Yeah.
interesting. so I wanted to explore like what that was like, because in the first book she's like 18 or 19 or something, and so in this third book she's like 27,
Okay.
and it's at that point in your life you're starting to think, especially back in the 80s, like you can kind of coast through most of your 20s and still think of yourself as a kid. But when you start getting beyond 25, each birthday becomes like that much closer to having to make adult decisions and think about like,
Right.
what am I actually doing with my life? Am I ever
Yeah.
going to get married and have kids? Am I going to go to college or have a career? Or what am I doing if I'm
Mhm.
just sort of fucking around? And I spent most of my 20s, I was doing comics and stuff, but I didn't get really serious about my career, I think. Um, to the point where I was thinking about making a living off of comics
Mhm.
until like my early 30s, really.
Okay.
And so I wanted to write about that sort of passage of time of like Ethan's moving towards 40, Anna's moving towards 30. Like, what's the difference there in their mindsets? And Ethan, like me, is a Navy brat. Like I wanted to. One of the things I loved about creating his character was I'd never seen a detective hero that was like a military brat. Well, I guess Reacher is a military brat,
Mhm.
but when I read it, I know that the guy who created Reacher was not a military brat because there's something missing there. Like I like
Okay.
those books a lot,
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
don't. But there's a certain melancholy. Like every military brat that I've ever known also has like weird issues with like friendships
Right,
and
because you're
and
moving all
they're
the time.
isolated. Yeah, you move every 2 years if
Yeah.
you're lucky. You might get 2 years, but you even in that time period, like when I lived in Gitmo, like for the first 3 months that I was there, like I had a best friend who lived in the house next door, and then one day he was just gone. Like his
Mhm.
whole family was just gone because they got
Yeah.
transferred somewhere, and that was the end of their time there. It's not like you're always going in the same time periods as people.
Yeah.
So like for me, like as a kid, I always felt very isolated and it was hard for me to make friends. Even as an adult, I feel like, I have a small circle of like close friends that I trust, and then
Mhm.
a bunch of people who I consider like acquaintances,
Right.
and I really wanted to write about like that kind of a character. Like I'd never really seen somebody that sort of got across that sort of weird melancholy and nostalgia and sadness in like a guy who also goes out and like gets in trouble and solves problems for people and kicks ass.
Right.
um so yeah, Destroy All Monsters is like the third book in the series, and it gets into like the history of some construction in LA around the building of the 105 freeway, which if you've ever been to LA is the one that goes directly to the airport.
Mhm.
And I did a lot of research as I was starting to work on the book. I was trying to find the right sort of LA corruption to wind the story around, and I stumbled across the story, which I kind of vaguely knew about from growing up in San Diego and coming up to LA in the 80s to go to punk shows or shop or go to cool record stores or something. But I had no idea about this huge lawsuit that had started in like the early 70s, like when they started planning the 105 freeway, I think in the late 50s or early 60s,
Mhm.
and they didn't actually start building it until the mid 80s because there were so many lawsuits.
Oh.
But Caltrans, who was going to tear down all the houses that were going to be bulldozed for it, started buying up houses in like the early 70s or mid 70s and just left them standing vacant for like a decade. There was this huge miles long corridor of vacant houses that cut through like Linwood and Compton and
Mhm.
all these neighborhoods. And it's like they were sort of some of the neighborhoods, like Linwood was actually like, in the 50s, they would have called it a sundown neighborhood.
Okay.
And like Black people could come there to like do yard work and stuff, but they
But
would have
after
to be out.
sundown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But after like the Watts riots and stuff started to change in those neighborhoods. Like people started moving away to Pasadena or further suburbs
Mm.
away. And like middle class Black families started moving into Linwood, and it started to become a more sort of mixed neighborhood, but still
Mhm.
sort of like middle to upper class.
Right.
And then when the corridor appeared of all the empty houses, like basically it sort of created the LA of the 80s that you think about when you think about like movies like Colors or you know, or like Boys in the Hood or anything like that. Like
Mhm.
it, but we don't talk about that. We always blame it just on crack. And so I was like, oh, this is really interesting that basically there was this time period where, because I mean, when I was doing research about it, I found out
Yeah.
so much about the chief of police and the sheriff actually, you know, said something like 80% of the crime that was violent crime that was happening in LA was happening around those corridors.
Ah.
And in those corridors, people would murder someone or kidnap someone in Hollywood and dump their body in one of these vacant houses, and they wouldn't be found for months. And
Mhm.
yeah, it was a real thing that helped sort of create, you know, I hate to use the word ghetto, but it
Yeah.
it turned these neighborhoods into, you know, ghettos in a lot of
Mhm.
ways. And so that was really interesting. I try to include some LA or Hollywood history in each of these books because I want that sort of, you know, the world he's living through is, you know, a very corrupt world. Like we all
Mhm.
lived through it, but he's seeing things that I didn't see when I was a teenager, certainly.
Right.
Though I do remember pulling off the freeway at the wrong exit once in like 1985 and being pulled over by a cop and being told, "Hey, go back to the freeway." You know, or like being assumed I was there to score drugs. And when I
Ah.
said, "No, no, no, we're just trying to get to Venice Beach," he was like, "Well, you got off at the wrong exit." And you know, and it was like,
Yeah.
you know, it was you know, it was scary little interaction with the cops, especially since we had like a bunch of alcohol in the car and we were underage. um but yeah, I try to include that, you know, that sort of seed of a corrupt fallen world into each
Mhm.
book. So that was a lot of I wouldn't say fun, but sort of, you know, it's like
Fascinating though.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like when you stumble across something, you're like, oh, James Elroy hasn't written a book about this yet.
You're just going down
You
that
know,
rabbit hole and
yeah.
learning,
Well,
learning.
it's like
Yes.
when I was like I'm always fascinated by Chavez Ravine, which was like a really thriving like Latino neighborhood,
Okay.
and now it's Dodger Stadium. Like they
Oh.
basically, like if you look it up, you can find tons of stories about how they just forcibly evicted thousands of people from their homes and bulldozed the whole place because the Dodgers were coming.
Oh, well.
And you know, it was a huge political scandal at the time. It's in White Jazz, the Elroy book. It's a lot
Okay.
about that one apparently. But yeah, I like to get that sort of seed of corruption into
Mhm.
all of those books. And so that comes out next week, and it's a fun romp.
Yeah.
There's lots of violence and explosions in it, as well as all this other stuff. And then Friday comes out in, I think, the second week of November. And that's something Marcos Martin and I have been working on with his wife. Munsa is doing all the colors, and she's really brilliant. And we've been working on that for about a year and a half now, and we're finally releasing the first collection of like the first act of the story, basically. And Friday is sort of one of those things I'd been thinking about for half my life without realizing it. Like I'd been always wanting to do, like when I was in my early 20s and living in Seattle, I lived around the corner from a public library, and I
Mhm.
got obsessed for a while with rereading old YA books from my childhood. Like one day I was in there
Okay.
and I saw the return stack had the entire Great Brain series in it. And so I just checked the whole thing out and reread the Great Brain and just loved every moment of it. And it took me back to my childhood. And so then I'm like, all right, I'm going to read Harriet the Spy again. And then I got really obsessed with all of Louise Fitzhugh's few books because she died tragically young. And then I read a bunch of Judy Blume's, and I spent probably a year just doing nothing but reading like YA books and like John Belair's stuff that's illustrated by Edward Gorey. And so somewhere in the back of my mind, I had this fantasy that I could do that as a career, like live in some cute little house and just write young adult like mysteries or supernatural stories or something. And that was like this alternate life that I never got to live. And Marcos reached out about a year and a half ago and asked if I had any ideas for something to do with him for his site Panel Syndicate, which is like a digital publishing platform that he and
Okay.
Brian Vaughan invented for their book The Private Eye.
Oh,
and you can
I
go there
great
and you
book.
can get anything that you want for however much you want to pay. Like you can pay $5, you can pay $1, you can pay nothing.
Mhm.
And you can get, PDF or CBZ or whatever the digital files are.
Oh,
And
okay.
so he asked me that, and I suddenly just had this image of him drawing that kind of something, Wes Anderson meets Edward Gorey meets H.P. Lovecraft kind of idea. And I just bounced a bunch of these ideas off him, and he was super into it. And so we just immediately started working on this thing I call it post YA, which Chip Zdarsky told me is just A.
That sounds about
but
right.
but it's like, in my mind, like, this is like the YA detective sidekick character who decides that she wants to start her own life and goes off to college, and now she's back for Christmas, and she immediately is thrown into a mystery, having to go back and work with, it's Friday Fitzhugh and Lancelot Jones, the smartest kid in the world. And basically Lance, the second that she arrives in town, is like drags her into a case, and before she even gets to go home and say hi to her moms, she has two moms, she is dragged off into the woods in the snow, hunting down like a crazed kid who's stolen, this ceremonial dagger, and is making weird inscriptions into a tree, and it tumbles into this whole huge mystery around their town. Yeah. But at the same time, it's a book about like growing up. It is that post YA thing. Like their history is, when you see their history in flashbacks, it's the covers of a bunch of YA books that they starred in. Nice. And it's just been a joy to do, because I have so much love for the YA genre, but I wanted to sort of do something a little meta with it. So it's like, oh, what is that thing where you kissed your best friend the night before you went away to college, and you're like, oh God, did I ruin our friendship? Like, what's happening here? Oh, that was weird. That was like kissing my brother. Like, it's, like there's a lot of stuff about that growing up and leaving your little town, and then you come back to it and you're like, why did I want to leave this place so bad? This place is awesome. And yes. It's been a pretty big hit for us, I think, on the digital side. But yeah, we're finally getting it out in print now, and nice. We're going to release, I'm hoping, sooner than later, we'll have the we're doing like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 in these little paperbacks, and they're actually smaller than comic book size. They're like the same size as those Darwin Cook Parker books, where they're like 6x9. Oh, okay, so they're cool. Closer to size of like a YA book.
Okay.
And yeah, so I'm hoping we get those out over the next year or so. Marcos is almost done with the next chapter, which is a really long one. It's like 40 pages long. Okay. And so we're hoping that'll go live around the same week that the trade paperback comes out for the first one. But yeah, that's been a lot of fun. And those are like the two things I'm working on, which is funny because they're both kind of throwbacks to like, detective characters in some ways.
Well, you do a great job with those type of characters, so we will continue to be reading, and I look forward to both of those, Reckless and Friday, coming out very, very soon. I will link all of that, of course, here for our listeners. But is there anything else you wanted to share? Deep dark secret, or no? I'm just kidding.
Deep dark secret. Have you been watching? I know Fraction and I have been talking about. Have you been watching Only Murders in the Building?
Yes, and Greg and I have been talking about it as well.
I'm like obsessed with it. My wife is so obsessed with it. She's actually got a notebook where she's charting like all the suspects and what floor they live on. She's making like a chart of the building.
I love it. She's got her own board.
She freeze framed the screen on the wall, and so she's got like everybody's names and what apartment they live in.
Oh my goodness! Who does she suspect? Who is it that killed Tim Kono?
I mean, I think it's two people.
Okay. Oh,
okay. We're gonna find out Monday, right? We'll find out Monday. I guess so. Hopefully. Yeah. Unless they don't resolve. I can't imagine they don't resolve the mystery in the first season. But I know they got greenlit for a second season.
They did. Yes, they did.
I am old, so I had no idea of who Selena Gomez was, other than that I remember there was a brief moment where she was interested in being in the TV show that Hallie and I were working on with Nicholas Ruffin, and then her agents read the script for episode episode 2, which would have been the one she was gonna first appear in, and they were like,
Okay.
absolutely not.
Oh.
So I was like, no, she will not be a cartel assassin. But I didn't grow up watching her on the Disney Channel or something, so this is really my first experience with Selena
Okay.
Gomez, and I am like obsessed with her voice. Is her I mean, first off, she's like,
got some
she's
deep,
with yeah, she's got this deep nasal voice,
yeah.
but she's able to like really match wits with Steve Martin, and and it just, I love seeing the three of them interact. And it's just really, it's funny because I've talked to a lot of people who are watching it and they're like, I can't stop watching it, but I can't tell if I really love it or if it's just the right thing for me at this moment. And I'm like, I think it's both.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's brilliant. I also think it's kind of light. And
Yes,
it's kind
just
of
light enough.
yeah, it's just light enough.
And just
but
dark
then,
enough because it's about murder.
yeah, exactly. Because it's like a
Yeah.
I mean, the stories inside of it are all tragedies.
Oh, I
But
know.
somehow, like, their interplay, you've got Martin Short always
the-
with these little cutting remarks in the background, like putting
Yes.
Steve Martin's character down, and
Yes.
and her like standing up to both of them.
Yeah.
And, you know, I remember there's like a scene in the early episode where Steve Martin's like, I would like you to be nicer. And she's like, I know you would. It's just like, I just love that. That's one of the ones where I'm like really jealous that I didn't think of it either, because it's like, it's so smart for like a pandemic kind of
It is.
to show, because it's like mostly takes place in the building.
Mhm.
And you know, it's a very contained thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's like a huge, I mean, but you know, my theory is, and we'll see, is this going to air after the finale?
It's going to air after.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
So okay, so I think that after the last episode, I think Amy Ryan's character is one of the killers. I think that she's been lying the whole time and has gotten close to Steve Martin. Like I think she's like a live wire. Like her story, we rewatched all the episodes the other day.
Oh wow.
And like her story on their date is really weird. Like her story about her stepsister who played the flute, and so she couldn't play the flute. And I think she's a character,
and then
who's
she's
really
obviously
driven
lying.
by jealousy. Yeah, she's obviously lying. She's not the first
she's
chair.
not the first chair.
Yeah, and I think like I remember the episode where she was trying to help them solve it. I was like, oh, she's the killer.
That's what I said too.
Yeah,
I said that to my husband. I'm like, she's the killer. He's like, what? I was like, I don't know. I'm just saying that, but
just
who knows?
Yeah, because there's some shows like we recently watched this British show called Death in Paradise, which I guess is huge in England. It's all on like Amazon, on like one of the channels we subscribe to or something. And and there's like 10 seasons of it, and like,
oh wow,
it's like it's had 4 or 5 main characters. It's like it's a cozy. Basically, it's like an Agatha Christie kind of inspired thing, where like a British detective goes to like a island in the Bahamas that's like a British protectorate or something, or something they used to own, and teams up with like the locals. And apparently, while it's like this great like, little tourist attraction island, they apparently have 8 murders a year, because they make 8 episodes every season. I'm like, that's a huge, like for England, that would be more murders than England has, I think. But yeah, that show's really cute because they always get everybody together at the end for them to walk through it. But I always know within 5 minutes who the murderer is. Yeah, exactly, like Clue, or like any kind of Agatha Christie Poirot thing.
Does your wife get mad that you get it right? That you
No, she's watched it all before, so she knows.
Oh, she already knows.
Yeah, she watched all of it because she loves cozies, and I was like, oh, this show seems ridiculous, but I know immediately because I'm like, oh, it's whoever is the most recognizable guest star that I've seen on other British TV shows. Which occasionally I've been wrong, but usually I'm right. Often I'm like, oh, I see. Oh, yeah, okay, I know because I'm just such a like mystery person. But for Only Murders in the Building, they've really kept me guessing, because I was like, oh, it's this. And then they went in that whole direction with the death episode, and I was like, oh, this is amazing, and that's such a tragedy.
Yeah,
and,
I would guess you'd be able to guess right away, being that you write.
No, I think, but when I saw Amy Ryan like trying to help them and them rejecting her, I'm like, oh, she's the murderer.
Yeah,
because in Columbo, whoever starts, I mean, you know, in Columbo who the murderer is, but when you're rewatching old Columbos, there's always a scene where he's with the person who's the murderer, and that person makes the stupid error of, instead of just acting normal, like, and being like, well, I don't know what to tell you, this and this happened, you know,
They
can I
start
get back to my
blaming somebody
job or
else.
whatever, they immediately are like, oh, so you think it was so and so? Oh, I get it. So this means, and they're always trying to steer Columbo in a direction away from them. And then immediately Columbo is like hanging out with them because he's like, whoever tries to steer me away to someone else is the killer.
Right.
So that was my Columbo instinct kicked in with Amy Ryan,
Okay.
but then she ended up getting stabbed at the end of that episode, and I was like,
But she
oh,
didn't
okay, something else
die,
is going on. Yeah, I think she stabbed herself. I
right?
think
But she
she's like
didn't die.
she's like one of those like Munchausen by proxy, but doing it to herself kind of people.
Mm,
But yeah, I think she poisoned him and someone else shot him.
okay.
And I don't
Okay.
know who it is. It might be the guy who he got put in jail for 10 years.
Okay.
But I think it's a case where there's two murderers probably.
Mm.
One of them that like poisoned him, and then another person who shot him not knowing he'd already been poisoned. Because why would you poison someone and then shoot
And then
them after
shoot
they were
them,
already
right?
dead?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then how did the cat like get poisoned? Like,
Right.
so did the cat lick poisoned blood? Like, because he would have had to have been, I don't know what poison that would be, that the cat licking some blood would immediately die. Did it drink whiskey out of his glass? Like, I don't know if a cat would drink whiskey. Maybe my dog would drink anything that I put in a cup on the floor. So it's been fascinating and so much fun to
So much
watch.
fun.
Like we watch it at 9 p.m. every Monday night. The
Wow.
second that it comes on Hulu, we're like, that's it. We're there. It's been totally like a joy to watch it, to the point where I'm like, I was so thrilled that they gave it a second season.
Yeah.
But it's like that weird blend between like comfort food and kind of brilliant at the same time. Like if the all silent episode doesn't get every Emmy next year, I'll be really surprised.
Oh,
like there
brilliant.
is literally no dialogue out loud in that whole episode. And I didn't even realize how much it was. Like for some reason, when I watched it the first time, I thought, oh, well, Amy Ryan and Steve Martin are on this date, but they're doing all their communication through nods and playing Scrabble and writing like sexy words to each other on the Scrabble board. And then everyone else is texting each other, and then the guy's reading people's lips, so it's all subtitles. So it was really interesting to see. I was like really jealous of that episode.
I love when you're jealous of episodes, and that goes on the we know that it was really good list.
Well, there's like one, I think that episode and I can't remember I think it's episode 6 of season 2 of Mythic Quest on Apple.
I love Mythic Quest as well. I like the COVID episode.
That was really great. That was really, like, really great.
Crying. Oh, it's just like, oh my God.
I actually, one of my friends who was a writer on Westworld, Kath Lingenfelter, Charlotte, who plays Poppy on that show. Like when she would come from Australia for pilot season, she would live at Kath's house. So I've had dinner parties with her and like game nights with her and stuff. And so it was so nice to see her finally land something where she like really just exploded as like, you know, one of the biggest characters on that show. But the flashback episode about F. Murray Abraham's early days.
With the
backstory. I think that is one of the best episodes of television I've ever seen in my life. It was like an episode of Mad Men or something, but like a little bit funny and a little bit more tragic.
He's brilliant too. You know? I mean, you just
oh my God. Yeah, I would have never expected, having seen that actor on a bunch of stuff like Silicon Valley, that he could do that sort of F. Murray Abraham character as a, you know, like, I'm the young version of this older guy. But he really pulls it off, and it's shot like a movie, and it's you know, it's written by Craig Mazin, who's like one of the best like writers in Hollywood.
And then you get to learn about all these, all the sci-fi writers, and you get that nostalgia. And like, you feel like you're
asked
watching.
My agents at one point, I was like, "Can you get me in that room for season 3? Like, is that a thing?" Like, it hasn't been greenlit for a season 3 yet. I'm like, "Oh, okay."
I love it.
But then I thought about it, and I was like, "Oh, Craig Mazin would just take whatever the best episode was and knock it out of the park anyway." So I would just be like miserable. But yeah, that and Only Murders in the Building have really been like my fun, you know, watches. I'm still like, it's hard to, like, Halloween's coming, so we're watching a lot of horror stuff. And it's been interesting because it's like I really enjoyed Malignant, but I guessed what it was about like 5 minutes in.
I don't watch
I don't know if
movies,
you've seen it.
No, I won't watch any. I won't. I once it gets, I don't like horror movies, but you know.
It's a super creepy one with a super creepy twist.
Okay,
but also feels like a fun 80s horror thing.
okay.
And
So
but
you
yeah,
got
we've
it
been watching a lot
right
of that
away.
stuff. Yeah, I got it right
Of
away.
course you
But
did.
yeah, I'm having like I don't want to watch anything really serious right now. Like I
Yes.
love Oscar Isaac and Jessica Chastain, but I don't want to watch scenes from a wedding right now. I'm like in the
Yeah.
middle of a pandemic, or
I
hopefully towards the end of a pandemic.
well, I felt that way too about like
Yeah.
Oscar season. Like not
Yeah.
was it this last one with like Parasite and all of that? I was like, can we
Oh,
just
I
make
love
like
Parasite.
but they're all so depressing. And I'm like,
It
all the
was
movies, because I
really,
try to watch,
yeah.
and then because of the SAG Awards, you're like, okay, I vote, and so I'm like
Yeah.
trying to actually be a good voter, watch everything responsibly. I was like, can we get something like happy to
Yeah.
watch?
That's
Like
I think,
everything was
yeah.
so depressing. I was like, oh my God.
I guess Knives Out came out before the pandemic, right?
I think so. Yes,
Yeah, because that was
because
out in theaters and
yeah,
it
that
was
was in
huge.
theaters, and I actually think
Yeah.
I remember
I'm just
Fraction
enough of
and
a
Rucker
homebody
were
that
all like going to the movies to watch that for some reason. I don't know why that just
Yeah,
popped into my head. But yeah, no,
that's
but I
funny.
just feel like, yeah, I want something happy. Do you watch Ted Lasso also?
I do, and I was disappointed with season
Oh,
2,
with season 2, you
honestly.
don't love it?
It felt too sugary sweet for me. Like
Sweet. I
I
thought there was a lot of downer episodes.
it was, but there was something like the Christmas episode. I was like, first off, why do we need a Christmas episode right now? But I also was just like, God, everybody's so sweet and stuff. Even when the guy was like, you shouldn't date that guy. You should date someone who makes you feel like you're on fire. I'm like, ugh. Like, I don't know, season 1 felt perfect for like the perfect pandemic show. And season 2, I
season
was
1
just
was
like,
perfect.
I hate to be part of the backlash. Because I did enjoy season 2 and I liked the end of it, but
okay.
but I was like, I don't know. For me, it felt like almost too sappy in season 2. Whereas
okay.
like I liked, like in season 1, he was so much like, you were rooting for him to figure out that he was brought there to fail.
Yes.
And he was slowly winning everybody else over. But now in season 2, like everybody was so nice and so happy, and it was like, oh, the show with no conflict, so they have to invent like the conflict is about him and why he's that way. And
interesting.
but at the same time I watched it,
Yeah.
so it's like I liked it enough that I watched it. And
True.
and I have a lot of other stuff I could have been doing. But it is that it is like right now I
that
feel
escape.
like, like we rewatched all of Rockford Files, all of Columbo, all of Murder, She Wrote.
Oh my God.
Like all that stuff's on the Peacock.
Yeah. Okay.
and you can just, like we were already subscribed to that. So
yes.
But there was a lot of like fun, cool TV that like there's a show. I love the Great British Baking Show, which is called the Great British Bake Off over there.
Yeah.
And I'm really bummed that they got rid of the original 2 like sidekick characters, Sue Perkins and Mel Gedroych. And they have a TV show together where they play hitmen, which is hilarious and light and fun, and it's on Peacock. But like I've been just really kind of like, okay, what's something that's going to make me laugh, or that is a crime show that's just not too dark, like, which is weird to me because I'm like, I remember Kelly Sue and I first bonding over like how much we couldn't stop watching Special Victims Unit,
right?
Or CSI or any of that stuff.
Yes.
But now I'm like, SVU, I don't know. I'm glad they brought Chris Melanie back, but at the same time, it's like, oh, this stuff's so brutal.
Yeah.
So like I feel like
you.
the world is so brutal that I just want things that are like much more fun. And I know in Hollywood, actually, that's like it's a big shift. Like we went out with a couple shows during the pandemic where people were just like, people who'd been excited about the idea of them before were like, maybe too dark. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Because, and then I thought about my own habits during the pandemic and I'm like, yeah, I get it. People want something that's going to take their minds off things and take them away from, whatever troubles they have. And, I mean, I still think there's room for stuff that's dark and thrilling. And
Squid Game.
Yeah, Squid Game. Yeah, I watched that in like 2 days.
Oh my gosh, I've only seen one episode. So
wow.
I clearly don't have the focus that you do to get to the stamina to watch all the shows.
Well, everybody that I knew had already seen it and was like angry that I hadn't watched it yet, so they couldn't talk about it. And so I was like, all right, fine, I'll give it a chance. And then like by the end of episode 2, I'm like, I am so in on this show. And somehow it's fun because you're rooting for these different people, but you know there's going to be a lot of people dead.
Yes.
So by the end of the first episode, you're like, holy shit. But yeah, that one
Shit
is
got
like
real.
bizarrely. Yeah, I mean, if you think Parasite's dark. Because it feels almost like a sequel to Parasite to me.
Yeah, but then the tone of it is still, like you said, there's like there's like an action or something, whereas I just
it really pulls you in. I would say of the dark stuff that I've watched during the pandemic, it's the one that's been the most fun and sort of addictive.
All right, so because my husband's like, I don't know if you're gonna want to watch
dark stuff.
Of course not. You got to keep your inspiration up for your writing because we still have to have that grit. But
yeah, I have enough darkness inside.
In any case, I feel like I could talk movies and TV and comics with you all day. So maybe you will agree to come back and talk to me again.
Yeah, absolutely. This was fun.
Excellent.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And so, Ed Brubaker, everybody. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Bye. That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/Sifu Mimi Chan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.